All right, we are diving into a massive question today. It's something philosophers have wrestled with for ages, but we're going to look at it with a really sharp, modern edge. The question is this: when we talk about global justice, where do you even start?
So let's just push aside all the complex theories for a second. The Argentine philosopher Enrique Dussel suggests that philosophy doesn't start with some grand abstract idea. It starts with this raw, undeniable human statement. It's not a concept. It's a person in pain.
And that one question, well, it pretty much throws a wrench into centuries of Western thought. It suggests that before we can even begin to build these big, elaborate systems of logic and reason, we have a basic ethical duty to respond to the person who's been left out, the one who's suffering. So that's what leads us right into Dussel's life's work, what he calls a philosophy of liberation. It's a way of thinking that doesn't start from the comfortable center of power. It starts from the margins. It starts from the perspective of those who are usually ignored. And Dussel has a specific name for this cry from the margins. He calls it interpellation. You can think of it like an ethical summons. It isn't a polite request that plays by the system's rules. No, it's a disruptive demand that comes from outside the system, forcing it to confront what and who it is shut out. It's the voice that basically says, hey, you've forgotten me, and you're responsible. To really get this, Dussel uses two key ideas. First, there's the totality. That's basically the system as a whole. Our economy, our politics, our accepted ways of thinking. It's everything inside the established order. Then there's the exteriority. That's the lived reality of those the system has pushed to the curb. The poor, the colonized, the other. That cry for justice, the interpellation, it erupts from that exteriority. Okay, so here's the real kicker. Dussel argues that, for way too long, philosophy has been obsessed with consciousness. I think, therefore I am, or with language. He wants to radically shift our focus to what he calls the paradigm of life. His argument is simple, but it's really profound. Reason is a function of being alive, not the other way around. The simple fact of being a living, breathing, hungry body, that is the ultimate foundation. Everything else has to come after that. Okay, but you might be thinking, is an emotional cry for justice really enough? I mean, what if the response just creates more chaos? What if one form of power just replaces another? This is exactly the challenge posed by the German philosopher Karl-Otto Apel. He argues we need to start not with feeling, but with reason. Apel basically looks at this and asks, okay, that cry from the oppressed is powerful. I get it. But how do we make sure the response is actually just? To avoid simply trading one injustice for another, he says we need some common ground, a set of universal rules for argument that everyone, the oppressor and the oppressed, has to follow. It's not about ignoring the cry. It's about building a space where it can be heard and judged fairly.
Apel's solution is something called discourse ethics. Probably the best way to think about it is like an operating system for justice, right? Before you can run any program, before you can address any specific injustice, you need a stable, universal OS that guarantees every single command is processed fairly. For Apel, this means you first have to establish the principles of an ideal communication community, a place where everyone has an equal voice, totally free from coercion. You have to build the fair courthouse before you can hear the case.
But hold on, because there's a third major voice in this debate, and this one isn't coming from abstract rules or a suffering body, but from the raw, traumatic memory of recent history. This is the challenge from the French philosopher Paul Ricoeur. You have to remember, for Ricoeur and so many others in Europe, the 20th century wasn't some philosophical thought experiment. It was a near-death experience for democracy itself. The fight against totalitarianism, both from the fascists and the communists, it forged a very specific and a very hard-won understanding of what liberation really means. It was a desperate battle just for the survival of political freedom and the rule of law. And this gets to Ricoeur's crucial point. There isn't one universal story of liberation. There are many. And for a continent scarred by Auschwitz and the Gulag, the highest priority, the non-negotiable foundation for any other kind of justice, is securing political liberty. I mean, you can't even begin to talk about distributing bread fairly if a dictator can just throw you in jail for disagreeing with them. You don't worry about the color of the curtains when the foundation of the house is crumbling. So what we have here are three powerful, competing visions. And they all clash over one fundamental question. When you are faced with injustice, what is the correct starting point for how you think and what you do? Let's just break this down. For Dussel, you start with the victim, with the person whose very life is being denied by the system. For Apel, you start with the rules of the game, the universal principles that ensure a fair outcome for everyone. And for Ricoeur, you start with history's painful lesson. You secure the political freedoms of a democracy first, because without them, all other struggles are basically doomed. Now, Dussel makes this absolutely brilliant distinction here that really sharpens his critique of these purely rational approaches. He asks, who is your opponent? Is it the skeptic, the person who joins the debate to challenge your reasons? Apel's discourse ethics is perfect for that. But what if your opponent is the cynic? The cynic isn't interested in a debate. The cynic has power and uses it to shut down the conversation entirely. They don't refute your argument, they deny your right to even speak. And Dussel argues that any real philosophy of liberation has to be ready to confront the cynic, not just the skeptic. So all of this brings us right back to the beginning. And look, this isn't just some dusty academic exercise. The starting point we choose has profound consequences for how we actually address the world's most urgent problems. So why does this matter? Because your starting point determines your priorities. It determines what you do first. Do you prioritize humanitarian aid? Do you work on building universal legal frameworks? Or do you focus on promoting democratic institutions? Each of these philosophies suggests a completely different path forward on everything from trade policy and military intervention to how we structure our own communities. We've laid out 3 very distinct starting lines. The final question isn't for the philosophers, it's for you. When you see injustice in the world, where do you instinctively begin? With the immediate suffering of the victim, with the principles of a fair process, or with the legal and political structures that protect basic freedoms? Your answer to that question reveals your own philosophy of justice.